This is Success Stories, a program of the Sorrell College of Business at Troy University that highlights the lives and careers of people who have accomplished great things. I'm Alan Mendenhall, Associate Dean of the Sorrell College of Business at Troy University and Executive Director of the Manuel H. Johnson Center for Political Economy. My guest today is Justice Greg Cook of the Alabama Supreme Court, who was elected to this office in November 2022 and actually took office in January 2023. And as we sit here today, it is April 2023. So Justice Cook, it's great to have you on the show.
It is my honor to be here, Alan. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, I want to ask you how these first few months have been. You were in private practice for over 31 years, and now you're at the Alabama Supreme Court. There must be a very different culture at the Alabama Supreme Court than there was in private practice.
It's a wonderful job. I can't tell you how excited and honored I am to have this job. It's a great privilege to be able to sit and think carefully about our law. I heard it said by someone one time that there are two kinds of lawyers. There are people that love being lawyers, meaning they love going out and fighting with each other, and I can do that, Alan, but really the second type of lawyer is the one who loves the law, and I really am that person. I love the law. I told people in the campaign trail that I'm boring and predictable. They seem to like that in a judge, that someone is predictable, and it's very, very true. I love my job. I love the ability to spend time researching issues, writing about issues, and getting it right.
Well, your love of the law is evidenced by the fact that you actually have written and edited books about the law, which is not typical for lawyers in private practice when you are back in private practice.
Right. I'm the author of the treatise in Alabama on the rules for civil procedure. It's a 2-volume treatise, a little over several thousand pages, and you have to update it every year. It's just no good unless you keep it current with all the changes to the rules and the various case decisions interpreting the rules. So I have to keep it up every year. And I'll just be honest, I love the rules of civil procedure. It probably makes me a little bit of a nerd, Alan, but you know, that's not a bad thing for a judge.
Yeah, even for lawyers, loving the rules of civil procedure is odd.
Yes.
Well, tell me, when did you start falling in love with the law? Was it before you were in private practice? Was it during law school? At a certain point in your life, you had to make the decision to actually go to law school. So I'm curious, when did your love of law develop?
I think I knew it when I was very, very young, and knew that the law was an area I wanted to think real carefully about going into. And then through high school, I was in the debate team. Then in college, I had a major in economics and a number of political science courses, and just loved it. And the Air Force is how I paid my way through college. I was ROTC, had a scholarship in college, so I owed them 4 years and loved that opportunity to serve in the Air Force, but that was not a law-related career that I wanted to stay in, so then I went to law school after that.
Well, I want to ask you about college in a minute, but first I want to ask you about growing up in Florence, Alabama. Yep. You're from Florence, and presumably you had some teacher along the way who was an influence on you, or somebody who inspired you to learn, because you went to Duke University and then Harvard Law School. These are top universities in the world, and so you must have gotten some really good instruction along the way.
So I went to Forest Hills Elementary and Forest Hills Junior High in Florence, Alabama. It's still there. They're now just an elementary school, but wonderful teachers there like Ms. Farmer, Ms. Metcalf. These were people who taught me to really be disciplined. I was not a disciplined child, and I know my parents did their best to discipline me, and they as teachers taught me that if you're going to be a good student, if you're going to excel, then you really have to spend the time studying. You have to harness your energy and be disciplined about it.
And what did you study at Duke?
So economics and computer science. I was a double major. Computers in the early 1980s were a different world, Alan, than they are today. My first course in computer science at Duke was on punch cards. So it was a completely different world. We had IBM personal computers by the end of my 4 years at Duke, but it was a different world.
Well, we've had a gentleman named Michael Maybach on the show before, and he was a vice president at Intel Corporation, and I think he joined Intel about the time that you graduated from college. So we have heard a little bit on the show about the sort of wild west of computers at that time, and it is a fascinating period. I'm curious about your time in the Air Force. How many years were you in the Air Force?
I was in the Air Force for 4 years. I spent my time at the Pentagon. The Air Force picks where they're going to send you. When I first got that assignment, I was actually somewhat disappointed because I wanted to go out there in the field and be at Air Force bases across the world and do traveling. But when I got to D.C., I realized that it's a wonderful place to be, especially when you're young and single. You get to do lots of things and see lots of things, and you know, being a second lieutenant at the Pentagon, you're not in charge of anything except maybe getting the coffee, but you get to see a lot of things and hear a lot of things. So I enjoyed my time in D.C. tremendously and had the opportunity to meet my wife there as well.
Oh, that's wonderful. And did you enjoy law school?
I did enjoy law school. I felt like it was a great privilege, having worked for 4 years and then to go back to school. I had a lot of energy when I went back to school because you're working, you develop those habits of coming to work at a certain time, working hard throughout the entire day, and then going home. And so I treated law school that way. And if I had an 8 o'clock class, you have an 8 o'clock class in college, maybe you're not that enthusiastic about it. 8 o'clock class in law school, I was there, I was on the front row, I had my coffee, I was paying attention, I had done my reading. I just considered it a great privilege to be able to go back to school and learn after spending 4 years in the real world.
And going to law school at Harvard, you get to study under luminaries, you get to have fantastic classmates. I know Justice Gorsuch was a classmate of yours. Did you have a favorite professor while you were there?
So Arthur Miller was my civil procedure teacher, and for the lawyers out there, I'm sure they know who Arthur Miller is. He's the author of essentially an encyclopedia on the rules of civil procedure. For the public out there, they may not know who Arthur Miller is, but he is the person who has written more civil procedure rules, I think, than anybody else alive. He's now in his 90s. He's still a professor. Now he's at NYU Law School. Just a tremendous academic, and I spent my first summer working for him doing pocket parts, which are updates to his treatise on civil procedure.
Well, you practiced, as I mentioned earlier, for over 31 years, and you've been in most counties in this state. You've practiced in small town courtrooms, large courtrooms. You practiced in state court. You've practiced in federal court. Are there cases that stick out to you as the most memorable, or the most sort of, or just maybe it's just cases that were odd or unusual that stick out?
I would say most of my practice in the last 15 years or so has been in federal court, so I've been all over the country. And oddly enough, Las Vegas is a place where I've had the most interesting cases, Alan. Some of those involved Enron. If you remember, Enron was manipulating the energy market, and in California in particular, California went to a system where they were selling energy by the hour on a bidding system. And so we were hired to represent Nevada Power, and Nevada is the state right next to California. It's interconnected. They didn't have enough energy, enough generation there, and so they would buy their power out of the California power market. And so Enron was manipulating the market, creating artificial shortages, and driving up the price of energy 100 or 200 times the normal hourly price so they could make huge profits. And our client, Nevada Power, was on the verge of bankruptcy, and we came in there to try to help them deal with Enron and the claims that Enron had, and deal with trying to recover against Enron and other people who were co-conspirators with Enron. It was a fascinating case and kind of a lesson on the free enterprise system and the way it can be manipulated. And among other things, we got to litigate in federal bankruptcy court in New York, where Enron's bankruptcy was. We helped pass a statute in Congress trying to assign issues from out of bankruptcy into the federal courts so that we could avoid some of the bankruptcy issues that were privileges that Enron had. We filed suits against a number of the natural gas companies that were manipulating the natural gas market because natural gas pipelines are the way natural gas is a fungible electric energy. So if you manipulate the natural gas pipelines, then you can manipulate the energy generation as well. So lots of details. We get to listen to lots of tapes of traders deciding to create artificial shortages and shut down power lines or shut down plants for particular times. It showed why the details matter, and we spent a lot of time and effort recovering a lot of money for our client who, like I said, was on the verge of bankruptcy, and we managed to help them avoid that. And so they are today the power company in Nevada.
Well, Enron and WorldCom scandals certainly affected the public perception of business, and it was only a few years after that that we had the TARP bank bailouts and a lot of controversy with excessive risk in the financial services industry. And I think that a lot of the trends we see in corporate America today are reflections of sort of the early 2000s scandals and an attempt to sort of recover that image with business. Did you consider your practice corporate or business-like? I mean, every lawyer, but people don't understand, lawyers are also operating a business. They represent clients and they are lawyers, but they're also running a business.
You're right, and I think sometimes people see black and white. They see people who are plaintiffs lawyers, and they see people who are defense lawyers who represent businesses, and that's not what the world is like. Businesses are people who have to recover monies against folks that have wronged them as well. My Enron example is an example, but I've got lots of others. We had a banking client who had lent money on some bottling facilities for a company that bottled teas and waters and juices and so on, and they'd borrowed essentially $1 billion, and they were nothing but a pyramid scheme. And the case, we sued them in Alabama. The case got drugged to federal court in Pittsburgh. We ended up taking depositions across the country, several hundred depositions. We took depositions in Germany, and we recovered for our banking client all of the money they had lost. It's an example of businesses that have to be plaintiffs. Another example, another banking client of mine, one of their vice presidents who was in charge of the credit card division, not the side that you and I see as consumers, but the side that deals with the processing of credit cards for businesses. And this vice president had been bribed, and he had signed up all these businesses that were, porn companies. They were companies that were selling products that people did not want, credit card protection, credit insurance, things that they're telemarketers. And so these were companies that nobody else, no other banks would provide business services for. And we would not have done that either because we knew we would lose lots of money if we did that. But our vice president was bribed, and so we lost about $10, $15 million on that. So we chased money across the world. We went to Bermuda to get bank records. We took about 100 depositions. We had subpoenas all across the country. And again, the bad guys were in Las Vegas. And we recovered all of our clients' money. But again, another example of why I've represented businesses who had to resort to the court system to recover monies for people that had wronged them.
Well, you recently had the opportunity to go back to Harvard Law School, your alma mater, and your daughter is a student there.
She is.
And incidentally, she edits the same journal that you were involved with editing while you were a law student, and I think that's very neat. When you went back, it was, 3 weeks ago or so?
Yep.
You spoke to the Harvard Law students, a particular group on the campus, and that must have been just really neat to go back and see where you had been in law school, see your daughter going through a similar experience that you went through, and having the opportunity to actually speak with law students and other people in the community about what it is you do and your passions.
It was surreal being back there and having the opportunity to speak to the Harvard Federalist Society, and it has grown. When I was a student there, I think we probably had maybe 40, 50. It's about 150 now. So same size school, triple the number of conservatives. Very affirming to see that. And I look at other law schools like Yale and Stanford that have had these incidents on campus where federal judges have been shouted down. And this has not happened at Harvard Law School, and I'm proud of of the administration as well as the Federal Society there, who make sure that people are treated with respect. And you know, when I spoke 3 weeks ago, I'm clearly a conservative, Alan. I have never apologized for that. I've written a number of pieces that are clearly conservative. I ran for the state Supreme Court as a Republican and was very conservative on the trail. No one was trying to shut me down. And we had a number of other conservatives who spoke that day. For instance, Judge Andrew Brasher, who is on the 11th Circuit here in Alabama, he's 11th Circuit judge, covers Florida, Georgia, and Alabama, and was a district judge here, U.S. district judge in Montgomery before he took the bench as an 11th Circuit appeals judge. So lots of conservatives there, and we were treated with respect. People listened to us, and it was a great honor to have a chance to speak.
Well, an interesting fact is Judge Brasher signed my admission certificate to the United States Supreme Court, so he was one of my sponsors.
Oh, that's
for the,
wonderful!
for the
yes,
US Supreme Court bar. I wanted to mention your talk, the actual talk you gave, because it focused on an issue that you're passionate about, which is state courts. The very first guest I ever had on this show was Judge Jeffrey Sutton.
Oh, wow!
And he works in exactly this space that you highlighted in your talk. So tell us a little bit about what you spoke about and your position on state courts and the role of state courts.
Yeah, it's my position that state courts are rising in importance in our country, and that sometimes the lawyers don't recognize that. The U.S. Supreme Court is clearly in a trend here of sending issues back from the federal level back to the state courts. And so the Dobbs decision, the abortion decision, is certainly the very best example of that. Instead of having a rule based upon the U.S. Constitution that would apply across the country, they've said, no, this is an issue for the states. And it's an issue for the states depending upon what laws get passed by their state legislature. It's also an issue for the states depending upon what's in their state constitution. So for an example, South Carolina's state Supreme Court, and I'm not agreeing or disagreeing, I'm just reporting on this, recently decided, post-Dobbs, after Dobbs, they decided that there's a provision in their constitution, in South Carolina, for a right of privacy. It actually says those words. It has the word privacy in their constitution. And so they decided to strike down a heartbeat abortion bill in South Carolina. Not providing you any information on what we would do in that instance, but they had a particular language in their constitution, and there was debate in South Carolina about how that would be interpreted. But that's just an example of how these issues that we all thought were federal issues are now coming back to the states, and we as state court judges need to be paying attention, and the advocates, the lawyers who appear in front of us, need to be making sure that they are paying attention to what the state Constitution says.
Well, famously or infamously, Alabama's Constitution is the longest in the world, so far as we can tell. And I would imagine as a judge, that means there are some gaps in the understanding of different provisions of the Constitution that maybe some scholarship could fill. Is there a role for scholarship on the Alabama Constitution that could assist judges with their hermeneutics, with their interpretations, with their everyday tasks, in particular at that highest level where justices are looking at constitutional text on a day-to-day basis?
Absolutely. You know, we've had 6 constitutions in the history of Alabama. If you include the recompilation that we just passed in November, it would be 7, but I'm going to call them 6 because the 1901 Constitution is really, when we recompiled it last time, we really just restated the same Constitution. So we've had 6 constitutions. The wording of those provisions have generally stayed the same. Now, you know, we've added a lot of amendments in Alabama, but you know, if you look at the core, the fundamental rights in our Constitution have generally stayed the same over these 6 constitutions. Now, what those words meant in 1819, that requires some scholarship. You know, the originalism, which is the brand of judicial philosophy that I believe in, looks at not the intent of the people who passed the laws, who passed the Constitution, but the original public meaning of those words. In other words, what the public would have understood those words to mean when the amendment, when the Constitution got passed. So we're going to have to look back at what some of those words meant in 1819. That's not an easy thing to do. Then we look and see if there's legislative history for the people who were in the convention in 1819 that passed that first Constitution, or if there's a later revision to it over the years. This is hard scholarship. This is not easy. And we at the court we can't decide things that aren't brought to us. We need the lawyers to go do that work, and we need some of the scholars at the law schools to do that work, and the students who are coming up those law schools should realize that this is a wide open field. They can go write law review articles on particular provisions in our Constitution and the history of those, and probably nobody else will have done that, and they will be the only voice, the only article that we will be citing. So I think it's a wide open field, and we need their help.
Well, I'm glad you drew the distinction between original public meaning and original intent. I think that's very important. I think in journalism in particular, you see writers missing that distinction or unaware of that distinction, and it is critical. You mentioned earlier that the United States Supreme Court seems to be moving toward a jurisprudence that is more decentralized, or maybe that's not the right word, maybe more prone to federalist solutions to complex problems, sending issues back to the states. Do you think that litigants will begin filing cases in the states, and maybe not starting with federal courts so much, but maybe trying their hand in the state courts first, rather than filing in, say, some federal district court?
I think they ought to. I think like I said, I think lawyers are creatures of habit, and they've done things a particular way all their career. They've always run the federal court when there's a constitutional claim. They should not do that. They should run the state court and file their constitutional claim, and they can raise the federal issue as well. And if we decide on their case eventually, our decision on the federal claim won't be actually binding on other litigants, but our decision meaning the precedent could be overruled, and the U.S. courts could decide a different interpretation of that provision. But on the state constitutional provision, we're the last word, and we are the final arbiters of what our state constitution means. So I really would encourage the lawyers to bring those cases in state court, get them to us.
Well, I asked you a question about business earlier, in part because I am in a business school, but I have another business-related question, and this is more about your role as a manager. People obviously associate you with being a jurist.
Yeah.
That makes sense. But what people may not think of is your role as a manager. You have a staff.
I do.
You've got assistants, you've got clerks, you've got staff attorneys. How do you choose to populate a staff? What do you look for in employees?
So I have a chief of staff who I was fortunate enough to hire from one of the other justices. She'd been a junior staff attorney for him. So that gives me somebody who is here in Montgomery and that understands the way that our court works. There are a set of internal operating procedures. I'm not supposed to tell anybody what they say, Alan, but you just know they exist, and some of them are very detailed. I need somebody that understands that process and understands the personalities and the staff on the court. She does a wonderful job. Beyond her, I have hired another staff attorney from another justice as well. So same kind of consideration, somebody who understands the way things work on our court. And then I've hired two law clerks who were at Sanford or Cumberland Law School, who are 3Ls and will start with me after the bar exam, and very enthusiastic about them. They're both on law review there, very top of the class. They're really wonderful hires. But they will be with me as clerks, meaning term clerks. They'll be with me for a year. I hired them because their resumes were outstanding. I hired them because they gave me writing samples that knocked my socks off. I hired them because I sat down and interviewed with them and felt like they were people that would work well with me and were easy to get along with, that clearly were very hard workers. And I won't call them boring because they're not boring people, but you know, predictable, we'll call them that. But I don't have any clerks set for the 24-25 year. I intend to do that. So certainly, if anybody sees this and they're a law student and they figure that they would like to work with me, I would be eager to look at their resumes.
Well, in the last minute or so we have here, I want to ask you about your children and how gratifying it is to see them grow up and to take on their own careers. You and your wife are both very well known in the community, prominent people, and it must be very satisfying. My children are young. You know, they're still. I've got one in double digits, one who's 11, and the others are all in the single digits there. So I'm not there yet. I haven't gotten to see them grow up, and I haven't gotten to that stage yet. But it must be very gratifying to get to that stage.
It's outstanding, and I will tell you, it happens very quickly. You know, when you're at home, when you're growing up with them, and you think they're going to be there forever, and then they go off to college, and boom, they fall off the face of the earth. And it's like sitting a ship, you know, a little toy, you know, sailing boat, sending it out into the ocean and seeing, is it going to go the direction that you pushed it? And you have to trust that, you know, you invested in that child, and you prayed over that child, and you gave that child the right, you know, right direction, and invested in that child, and they'll end up in the right place. And so my children are an incredible source of pride for my wife and I. We have one who went to Alabama in computer science, and he works for a Department of Defense contractor these days, and my daughter's in second year at Harvard Law and worked for Lamar Alexander in the Senate before that. And then my youngest is a senior at Alabama. And so just very proud of our children, and it's a long road, but it's worth every hour of investment.
Well, and I know they love their dad too. Justice Cook, it's been a real pleasure having you on the show. This has been Success Stories, a program of the Sorrell College of Business. I'm Alan Mendenhall, signing off. Thanks for watching.